Like sometimes when I look at regimental histories, units in the Army of the Potomac, even if you read their monuments here, you see a list of battles. Like, I've never heard of that.
Right.
But to those guys, that's just as big as any other battle. So this campaign that's going on outside Richmond, it's just important to them as Gettysburg.
From the Gettysburg Museum of History Studios, you're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, patrons, and welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg. And today we are talking with author Hampton Newsome, who wrote this book here, Gettysburg's Southern Front, Opportunity and Failure at Richmond. Raise your hand if the only thing you know about Richmond during the Gettysburg campaign is that Pickett had to leave 2 brigades there. Oh, you too, Mikey?
I'll put my hand up.
Okay, you put your hand up? Okay, good, yeah. Tad, how about you?
No.
You don't know anything about the battle anyway, right?
No.
Okay. Well, you'll learn.
Thanks, Dad.
Well, there was a lot apparently going on down in Richmond, and Hampton Newsome wrote a book about it. What year did this book come out, Hampton?
2022, I think.
2022. So it's been out there for a while. I'm sure some of you have discovered it and read it already, but we're going to talk to him about it today. You probably saw some interviews with him. I think I saw one. Did you do one with ECW, or was that... No, it wasn't ECW. It was, you won the book award from ECW.
Yeah. I did a short interview with them, but that was about 1864.
Yeah, no. Cameron Sowers interviewed you, so that must have been for the college.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was on, I think, my book about Eastern North Carolina.
Oh, it was. Okay, so it wasn't even about this book. But there is a lecture on YouTube that you did about this, and it's pretty interesting. We were listening to it up until we got on here with you. So, welcome to Addressing Gettysburg first.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. And so tell us, first of all, why write about this?
This was one of those projects that kind of fell in my lap. I was looking for, I'd written a few books about fairly obscure topics. That's been kind of my specialty. And someone suggested that I look at what happened during the Gettysburg campaign in Richmond when there was this Union offensive against Richmond. And I said, what Union offensive? What are you talking about? And so I started digging into it. And as with any book project at the beginning, you're kind of trying to figure out, is this going to work as a book? Is it interesting? Is there enough material for it? And I feel like I got really lucky here because it is a really interesting story, what was going on at Richmond. And there was tons of stuff to look at and tons of stuff that no one had really looked at before. And before we get too far ahead in the weeds, just in a nutshell, what we're talking about here is during the Gettysburg campaign, as Lee is heading north, Henry Halleck in DC develops this kind of counterblow plan, 3 prongs. He wants to go after Lee's communications, go after his supply lines. And he orders operations in Eastern Virginia against Richmond, which is most of, what this book is about. And he also orders a operation from West Virginia against the rail line that runs from Richmond into Tennessee. And he also orders the commander, John Foster, in North Carolina. North Carolina at the time is mostly, the eastern portion is mostly controlled by Union forces. He orders John Foster to go after the railroads there. And so what you have is this fairly large operation that almost nobody knows anything about. And it wasn't a combat-less affair. There were several battles, and it was integral to the Gettysburg campaign because what the Union forces outside Richmond were trying to do was cut Lee's supply lines and hurt his efforts up in Pennsylvania. Now, just you said, raise your hand if you know this. I give talks a lot of roundtables about this book. And I always ask people if they've ever heard of this operation. Sometimes it's called the Blackberry Raid. Sometimes it's called John Dix's Peninsula Campaign. And I'll be lucky if there are one or two people, even in a fairly big audience, who will actually know what this is.
Yeah.
So it's really fresh material for most people, even the most, drilled down Civil War buffs. This is was kind of interesting new stuff.
So was the goal with all these operations, but Richmond in particular, was the goal to actually take Richmond or just distract Lee?
That's kind of that's $1 million question, because Halleck in early June, Lee's heading up. We've got Brandy Station, and all his columns are heading into the Valley and into Maryland and into Pennsylvania. And at the time, Halleck sends orders. This is on June 14th. He sends orders to John Dix, who commands all of the forces in Eastern Virginia. Now we're talking around Fort Monroe and Norfolk and Yorktown, around there. He sends him orders to go after Richmond, but the orders are a little ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
They say, and I don't have them in front of me, but they say, basically, I want you to go threaten Richmond and burn the railroad bridges north of the city, that those rail lines that are connecting Richmond to Lee. Was Halleck asking John Dix to attack Richmond outright, or was he just telling him to go burn the railroad bridges? And this was a question that John Dix wrestled with throughout these operations, and he held several conferences with his officers trying to figure out, should we go attack Richmond? Lee's whole army is in Pennsylvania. Maybe we should attack Richmond, or maybe we should do the more conservative thing and send out some expeditions to attack the rail lines. So Lee, for his part, he's not really perturbed by a lot of this, because his view is he wants to concentrate his army, and the more aggressive he is up north, the better things are for Richmond and for Central Virginia. Some of the people back in Richmond they didn't really have the same view, because there was this force, fairly large, 20,000 men right outside of Richmond at White House Landing, threatening the city. And so they were maybe a little more concerned than Lee was. So that was basically the framework, what you're looking at, the decisions that they're looking at when they're going after Richmond there in June. And
how many Confederates are holding Richmond?
So Richmond has this kind of mixed force.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of what some people might call the B team there, and we've got commanders that you don't hear a whole lot about during the war. Arnold Elzey, who's technically in command of the garrison there. John Wise, who has a brigade that is stationed at Richmond for most of the war. Also Custis Lee, one of Robert E. Lee's sons. He kind of commands the defense force there. Then you've got the brigades that have been left behind. And it's a mix of brigades from Lee's army and from also the Department of North Carolina and Southern Virginia. And that department is commanded by Daniel Harvey Hill, D.H. Hill. And he, the interesting character, but he's been kind of he's been left behind. He hasn't been allowed to go on the cruise up into Pennsylvania. And so he's left with basically three solid veteran brigades. So Ransom's brigade, Cook's brigade, and Jenkins brigade. But there is also Montgomery Corse's brigade is kind of up north a little bit toward Gordonsville. And there are also elements of Pettigrew's brigade that are still there.
Oh.
In all total, we're talking about probably 13,000. So we've got 20,000 attacking, 13,000 in Richmond. And Richmond, by this time in the war, is a fairly solidly defended city. Lots of fortifications. And those who look at the Petersburg campaign, in 1864 and 1865, and that's something I've written on. Remember the Mickler maps, the Union engineering maps drawn after the war that just show this labyrinth of fortifications, different rings, that kind of thing. Yeah. A lot of that was already extant during the Gettysburg campaign, so they're going up against that.
Mike, you had a question?
Yeah, I was hoping to do it before we kind of dove into the history thing, so I don't want to backtrack us too much. But I know you said you like fairly obscure topics, which I think is fantastic because especially anything Gettysburg or Gettysburg era related, it's hard to make that original contribution to the historiography. So with everything you're giving us, how difficult was it for you to gather the information to write this? And where were you sourcing that information from?
It was actually, well, it wasn't easy. I did a lot of digging, but it was really fun. It was really refreshing because most of the stuff I was looking at were things that people had not really looked at before. So I spent a lot of time in the National Archives looking at the records for the various corps that were involved. I spent a lot of time in repositories and things like that. But I have to say, writing a book like this, it has its challenges because it's new, but it's also great because it's new. I'm currently finishing up a very long book on the Appomattox campaign because after 3 books on things that not a lot of people know about, I wanted to do something on something people knew about. Of course, I asked one of my coworkers a few years ago, they asked me, what book are you working on now? And I said, the Appomattox campaign. And this was a very bright attorney. And they said, the what? So
really?
So we'll see how that goes. But anyway, with that book, it's been fun, but it's a challenge because other people have worked in the area. And so not only are you looking for all the sources that you want to use and create the narrative and focus on the things you want to focus on, you're also looking over your shoulder to see, well, what have other people said? Do I need to address that? That kind of thing. So this particular book, especially given its close connection or its integration with the Gettysburg campaign, was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'd imagine that this isn't your first book, right?
No, this is I edited a book called Civil War Talks that were basically stories that were generated by Petersburg veterans. I edited that with my friends John Horn and John Selby. I wrote a book on the operations in Eastern North Carolina in 1864, the Battle of Plymouth, the Newbern Expedition, the Kinston hangings, etc. I wrote a book on the portion of the Petersburg campaign, the operations before the election in 1864, the battles of Burgess Mill, basically Grant's 6th offensive. That was another one, and then this book is the latest that's been published.
So was this one the more nerve-wracking one to do because it's Gettysburg, and or was it not because nobody knows about this aspect of it?
It wasn't really nerve-wracking. Although I have to admit, I've never done one of the. I listened to your show and all the guides are on, and it just sounds fun.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm embarrassed to admit that I've been to Gettysburg, of course, but I've never done one of the guided tours, which
you have to.
It's on my list. Like I have to do that.
Yeah.
So there were portions of the book does delve into questions about Lee's supply lines. What were they? That's hampered by that. There's really a big lack of records related to that kind of stuff. But also the little vignette on Brandy Station, because Rooney Lee, who gets wounded at Brandy Station, he becomes a big character in this raid because he is convalescing north of Richmond and ends up being captured during one of the expeditions that are covered in the book. So the Gettysburg, I wasn't, the book doesn't talk about where such and such regiment stood on Cemetery Hill or whatever. It doesn't get into any of the tactical detail of Gettysburg. But what's interesting, well, one of the many interesting things is these operations that Dix carries out outside Richmond, and just, we're talking about a cavalry raid against a bridge, and then a demonstration that goes right at Richmond, big infantry demonstration, and then a very large infantry expedition that goes north of Richmond trying to destroy one of the bridges there. These events happen on the very days that Gettysburg is occurring. So the infantry expeditions kick off on July 1st, and they conclude basically on July 4th. So while they're marching through the countryside east of Richmond looking for their targets, all of this stuff is happening up at Gettysburg. And also, all of this stuff is being discussed in detail in D.C. with all the leaders during Lincoln's cabinet meetings. It's all integrated into the discussion, because this was, while it didn't ultimately, spoiler alert, Richmond is not captured. While it didn't end up with that kind of result, the people involved on the scene and in D.C. at the time, they did not know that. And so this was something they talked about a lot while they were talking about managing the reaction to Lee in Pennsylvania.
Hey, buddy. What's got you so down?
Hey, Court. I'm looking for a gift, but I just don't know what to get my Gettys nerd friends and family.
It sounds like we need to have a talk. Come on. You love this place, don't you?
You bet I do. It's my favorite place in the world.
Well, you see, at Addressing Gettysburg, it's our mission to keep these stories alive.
How do we do that?
I'm glad you asked, sport. You see, Gettysburg is the gateway to the most brutal and crucial time in American history, so we interview experts, and our listeners learn with us.
That sounds amazing.
It is! Mike, are you f***ing serious?
What? It's for the commercial. What benefits do patrons get?
You mean besides up to 4 premium episodes per month and Matt being the bee's knees as host? How about early access to special episodes, behind-the-scenes insights, and discounts for ticketed events?
Whoa! None of the other history channels I follow do that for their listeners.
That's because Addressing Gettysburg doesn't take its listeners for granted and really cares about us learning American history.
You know, I should gift my Gettys nerd friends and family an Addressing Gettysburg Patreon membership.
You see, the answer was right under your nose the entire time.
Make Addressing Gettysburg's Patreon a gift for the Gettys nerd in your family this holiday season. Addressing Gettysburg wants you to learn about the Civil War with us, and we need your support. We'll run this ad until it gets annoying, and then we'll run it until you become a patron at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg or by scanning the QR code on your screen. Happy holidays.
The hell are we staring at?
No idea.
That's what I think is so fascinating about your study and your specific topic here, because we tend to get caught up in the bigger things.
Yeah.
We think of Gettysburg and Vicksburg at the same time. And that's kind of what was happening at that time. And I think we forget just how all-encompassing this war was.
Yes.
So many different things going on at so many times. Like sometimes when I look at regimental histories, units in the Army of the Potomac, even if you read their monuments here, you see a list of battles. Like, I've never heard of that.
Right.
Peach Grove.
Right.
But to those guys, that's just as big as any
Sure.
other battle. So this campaign that's going on outside Richmond, those men are far away from home. And the ones defending it are defending their capital. It's just important to them as Gettysburg. They don't even know.
They don't.
Gettysburg.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And they don't know how history is going to remember what they're doing at the moment. They don't really care.
Yeah.
They want to get through the moment. Right. Yeah. It is interesting to, because you're right, Mike. We hone in so much, especially Gettys nerds like us. Like we hone in on Gettysburg.
I've never heard that term before.
Really?
I love that. Gettys nerds.
Yeah, that's what I call the audience. We're all Gettys nerds.
Yeah.
But Gettysburg is everything, and the Civil War revolves around Gettysburg. But it's not that way in reality. It's a part of the war. It's one jigsaw puzzle piece in like a 1,000,000-piece puzzle. And it's not like everybody else everywhere said, all right, everybody, let's stop and wait for reports on how it's going in Pennsylvania. No, they had their own operations to take care of in front of them, right?
Yeah, and I think one of the important parts is that, well, just I read a lot about Gettysburg. I've read all the big thick books and things like that.
Right.
But I am not. I'm sure I'm not as into it as a lot of your listeners. I gave a talk in Pittsburgh, I think it was last summer, at a Gettysburg symposium, and some of the talks were really interesting, and the amount of detail about it was fascinating. But
you would find that about any battle. You go to an Antietam talk, you're going to have people who can do that too. Vicksburg, there's people who. I meet people all the time who are like, yeah, Gettysburg. And they're into a completely different battle, which is just as interesting. But, for whatever reason, they're just sick of Gettysburg.
But Gettysburg, let's face it, it's got kind of everything. All the pieces fall into place. And that's why people are fascinated with it for good reason.
Right.
I think for the soldiers, for the participants, for the officers, for the politicians in D.C., for the soldiers on the ground, there are kind of two things. One, yes, if you're in an action at Crump's Crossroads outside Richmond on July 2nd, 1863, that's an important event to you. There were casualties there. It's a battle. They'll remember it. And so that's an important point. But the other point is that at the time, as all of these things are unfolding, people don't know that Gettysburg is going to be the big thing that it has become, the big thing that we remember. And at the time, they are weighing a lot of different things that are happening all over the map, and they're trying to figure out how to allocate resources in D.C. And in Richmond, they're trying to figure out, well, do we reinforce Lee? Do we try to bring soldiers up to reinforce Richmond? What's going to be important here? Because they don't know what's going to happen.
Well, so that's what I was going to ask you before. Lee's up here while the Union forces are gathering around Richmond. And is he getting any communications from Richmond saying, hey, I need you to send somebody, or, are they panicking? What is the attitude in Richmond itself when this is all happening?
I don't think there's a lot of panic. I mean, D.H. Hill is a very competent officer. He's got horrible sandbox skills. He just kind of pisses everybody off, but he's very capable and he's very confident, and he handles things well there. Lee, for his part, he wants more men. He actually has this proposal at one point to bring Beauregard up from South Carolina and create an army in effigy around Culpeper during the campaign to threaten Richmond and to make the Union, the people making decisions on the Union side, whether, to decide whether they need to bring men back into the Washington fortifications. And then you've got Jefferson Davis in Richmond. He's a little concerned. I think the impression I got reading all the transmissions back and forth with Lee and Davis, some of which were captured, some of the key ones were kind of captured on their way up. But Davis is he seems a little annoyed that Lee is up there and asking for more men, and Davis is trying to manage things in Richmond. And Davis, as a lot of people know, does not ever miss a chance to micromanage things. Mm-hmm. And so he's working with D.H. Hill hand in glove in Richmond to manage the response to Dick's offensive, basically. So there are a lot of different viewpoints about whether this is a problem, whether it's not a problem. And there are a lot of different viewpoints on the U.S. side, too. And D.C., even in Lincoln's cabinet, there are different opinions about how important this is and what should be done about it. There are some, like Salmon Chase, the Secretary of Treasury, who thinks that Dick should be reinforced and there should be a full-blooded effort to capture Richmond outright.
Right.
Gustavus Fox, who was the assistant naval secretary, he has this quote where he says, this is something like, this is one of the best opportunities we've been given in the war. Why don't we go after it and go take it? There are other people, particularly kind of the war clique that are managing the war, Halleck and Stanton. They are more focused on what's happening in Pennsylvania. They see that as a much bigger threat, and they talk about taking men away from Dix and moving them back up north. And then there's some people talking about replacing Dix with someone who's a more aggressive commander.
So that's interesting, though, that because I would see it as an opportunity to tackle Richmond if possible, And so I'm surprised. What was Lincoln's thought on that?
I think Lincoln was kind of somewhere in the middle. He doesn't really. I don't believe he really weighs in on this because so much is going on. They're waiting to see what happens in Pennsylvania, and they're waiting to see what happens in Richmond. And so he doesn't really direct a change in course. And what does happen ultimately is that Dix burns one of the bridges, the railroad bridges. There is some success. There's a second railroad bridge. There are two rail lines that head north from Richmond. And the last large infantry expedition, which is really poorly managed, does not burn that bridge. And so there's a failure, and that news comes to DC, and by that time they're kind of thinking, well, this is all over. Lee's heading back, and if there was an opportunity there, it's gone now.
Mike.
Now, for those people that study the Gettysburg campaign itself, there's a lot of accessible information in the ORs, et cetera, with that communication coming from DC, especially with Halleck, who has his way of micromanaging things.
Yeah. He's writing Meade. Once Hooker's gone, Halleck's writing Meade like every 17 minutes.
Right. So do we have that level of communication with Dix? And is Dix treated a bit differently due to his familiarity maybe in those DC circles as compared to someone like a Hooker or a Meade, who are military men, where Dix is, I believe he had a cabinet position at the outbreak of the war, or he's much more on that political side of things?
Yeah, and that's a really great question. So Halleck does not afford Dix the same treatment he gives to Meade. Halleck sends that July 14th note, attack Richmond. Dix gathers his men, goes up the peninsula. He's at White House Landing. I think it's like 15 miles from downtown. It's very close. And Halleck essentially kind of ignores him for the next 2 weeks. He sends an occasional note. He sends a few notes that are contradictory, like one like, how are things going? Have you made any progress? And then the next day, we're thinking of maybe taking troops away from you and send them to Pennsylvania. Maybe this Richmond thing is not so important. Halleck seems very, very focused on Pennsylvania and doesn't really spend a lot of energy on Richmond, to the detriment, I think, of the effort there. And Dix he's a really interesting character. He's kind of a quintessential political general. By this time he's in his 60s, I believe. He actually fought in the War of 1812 as a teenager.
Wow. And
then he had a very distinguished career doing lots of things in the private sector. He was also a legislator. And before the war, he was during the secession crisis, he was the Treasury Secretary in the Buchanan administration. And he was, so one of the things they had in the Treasury were they were responsible for the revenue cutters, these boats. And he was trying to manage the installations as the secessionists were capturing the U.S. Installations or whatever. And he sent a note to his people in New Orleans, and he said, if anyone attempts to pull down the United States flag, shoot them on the spot. And this got in the papers, and he became a kind of mini celebrity for a little bit people would put this on banners, and there were these little tokens that had his statement on it. I saw some when I was out at the Rocky Mountain Civil War Roundtable in Denver. A guy in the group had two of them, which I'd never seen. I never seen a real one. But so Dix, he has this long career, but most of it is as a administrator. And so while he's a very senior general, he's not really looked at as the person that you want to put in an active campaign, like in a combat role. And so there is talk about, well, is Dix the right person for this? Is he aggressive enough? And his connections, you're right that he does swim in those waters because he has a lot of experience as a politician. But I don't think that has a big impact here. I think one of the interesting things about Dix is he's very conservative. He's a Democrat. He's against slavery, but he's also not a big proponent of, say, enlisting black troops. And he's also very much against any kind of thing that has the whiff of hard war. So he's very concerned about his troops in Virginia, whether they're destroying private property or whether private property has, does it have a strong nexus to the Confederate war effort and that kind of thing. So he's an interesting character, but maybe not the right person if what you really wanted to do was hit Richmond hard.
So he's not a very aggressive commander.
No. And I think a lot of that goes into this interesting question about the federal commanders early in the war. And there are libraries written about, well, why did they fail so much and that kind of thing. And I think part of it with Dix was one of those people who believed that, well, if we're not so hard on the white Southern leaders, they will see that this is not a good idea, this whole Civil War thing, this whole rebellion, and they'll come back to us. And if we treat them, politely is not the right word, but if we don't bring a hard fist on them, then we maintain that option for them. But if we are prosecuting a hard war, then that's going to close that door to us. And whether that really feeds into his decisions as a battlefield commander, it's a good question, but it's certainly an attitude that he had. And there were similar officers that had that kind of approach.
All that information is so fascinating to me because obviously Halleck would have a very good sense of the man that he has in charge of this expedition, and so would the president. And it doesn't sound. Did you say around 20,000 men were part of the?
Yes. So Dix had 30,000 in his department. He brought 2/3 of them to Richmond.
Okay. All things considered, considering it's the capital of the Confederacy, that's not a lot of support. And if you're saying Halleck was even trying to take some of that support away, what do we think that he basically saw the writing on the wall that, hey, maybe this is a great distraction to keep troops away from Lee's army as opposed to a genuine attempt to seize the capital?
Yeah, it seems more like a distraction than anything else, like a feint.
At Digital History Pioneers Foundation, we are about grassroots history on digital platforms. That means we are about podcasters, documentarians, YouTubers, and even TikTokers. All of these creators are out there trying to share their love of history with the public. They don't need ideas, they need funding, both from viewers and corporate donors. DH Pioneers' initial funding focus is on the Civil War era, with a special emphasis on the Addressing Gettysburg podcast. So be a vital part of the unique content Addressing Gettysburg has in store by donating at dhpioneers.com and help bring your love of history to the people. Digital History Pioneers is an IRS Section 501c3 approved charitable corporation that makes any donation tax deductible to the fullest extent of the law.
Yeah, well, I think so Halleck's original plan was really to go after the supply lines. So he wanted the railroad, the key, Wilmington and Weldon Railroad that connects Wilmington, the port of Wilmington to Richmond. He wanted that cut. He wanted these bridges north of Richmond cut. He wanted the railroad to Tennessee cut. So at the beginning, it had a very defined scope. And in his orders to Dix, he was a little ambiguous about whether he also wanted Dix to go after Richmond directly. So I don't think that what Halleck was thinking was a really kind of to create a distraction. It was to damage Lee's forces in Pennsylvania. Now, we all have this notion that Lee is just kind of floating around Pennsylvania, foraging, feeding his men from the farms. But there are wagon trains moving between Richmond and Lee's army during the campaign. One of them that contains a lot of ammunition reaches him as he's going back over the Potomac when he's running out at the time. So that's an important thing. So this thing that Halleck has, this idea he has for going after the supply lines, he's seeking a very tangible result. It's not just, we're going to try to throw some sand in their eyes while they're up in Pennsylvania.
Did you have another one? Or you look like you did. Sorry. So, are there any fights at this time, like any of substantial fights, or are they mostly just skirmishes?
Well, there's nothing anyone would call a battle, but there's certainly some significant engagements. The first is, and just to try to put them in a briefly describe them. The first is when Dix first arrives outside Richmond on June 25th, he sends his cavalry, which is under Samuel Spear. Most of it is the 11th Pennsylvania, a couple other pieces of other units, including 100 Californians. But he sends them up to the Virginia Central Railroad, which is north of Hanover Tavern. And Spear gets there, and he has this engagement against part of Pettigrew's brigade. It's, in fact, one company from the 44th North Carolina, commanded by this guy, Tazewell Hargrove. And Spear has about 1,000 riders with him, so you'd think that this would be a pretty quick engagement. But the North Carolinians managed to place themselves on the other side of the bridge where they need to get to and block Spear for a couple of hours and forces him to find a ford and come in with a flanking maneuver. And in the end, there's a very vicious fight at the railroad guard hut there. Lots of hand-to-hand combat. You see all these paintings of hand-to-hand combat in the Civil War, and we know that it happened, but it didn't happen that much. It certainly happened there at the Virginia Central Bridge, and this was on June 26. And a large percentage of Hargrove's men are casualties in that. But eventually, Spear burns the bridge. But by the time he's burned the bridge, he can't get to that other bridge, the Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac Bridge, which is the bridge if you drive down I-95 and look off to the west when you cross the South Anna. This is the South Anna River we're talking about. You'll see that bridge. But Spear can't get there because Hargrove made it so difficult to get the first bridge. Hargrove's an interesting figure. Later on, after the war, he's the Attorney General, Republican Attorney General in North Carolina, and prosecutes the Klan there. So kind of an interesting figure. So anyway, that's the first operation against that bridge. Very interesting tactically, the battle. Like, there's a whole chapter in the book about it, so I'm just glossing it over. But
it's funny.
They come back. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's funny because as I picked up the book as you were leading into this, and as soon as you said Spear's name, I fortuitously opened the book right to the chapter about this.
Okay.
It just worked out perfectly. But go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
So then they come back. Dix then decides, trying to figure out what to do. Do we go right after Richmond, or do we go and get that second bridge, the RF&P bridge? Okay. And he decides to do the latter, but he creates this large plan with his infantry. He sends a portion of it under Erasmus Keyes, the 4th Corps. These are all units that most people have not heard a lot about. He takes the 4th Corps. The Keyes is supposed to take the 4th Corps and go right after Bottoms Bridge, which is kind of this key crossing east of Richmond, and threaten Richmond there. And then he takes 10,000 of his men under George Washington Getty, the 7th Corps, and he sends them to go burn that bridge north of Richmond on the South Anna. And so what happens there is Keyes does a horrible job with his feint, and he ends up not getting to Bottoms Bridge. He ends up kind of stopping in the middle of New Kent County. If you ever drive between Richmond and Williamsburg, you're driving through this area. And D.H. Hill sees exactly what's going on. He says, well, they come out, they're threatening Richmond. He takes his 3 veteran brigades and he goes across the bridge into New Kent, and he just smacks Keyes at a little fight at Crump's Crossroads on July 2nd. Keyes kind of goes to this little town called Talliesville. All the while, this is only a couple of miles from Dix's base, and Dix is kind of worried that Keyes is going to screw things up so much that the D.H. Hill is going to capture his base. But anyway, so Keyes does not do a good job. Hill understands what's happening. He says, oh, well, this is just a feint, and he takes his men back into the Richmond defenses and sends Cook's brigade, the North Carolinians, up to that bridge that's the target of the other expedition, Getty's expedition. Getty leaves the same time that Keyes does, and he takes his 10,000 men up through King William County into Hanover County and goes after that bridge. And Getty does a really strange thing too. He does something I call kind of a breadcrumb strategy. As he's going along, he starts dropping off packets from his 10,000 man force into spots along the way. They stop at this plantation. He leaves a couple thousand there. There's a bridge over the South Anna that he leaves some men there. He leaves some men in Hanover, and at Hanover Tavern, he leaves him. He stays there himself, and sends about 4,000. I think I have a little chart in the book on it. But by the time they actually get to the bridge and they arrive there on July 4th, only a fraction of his original force is there. It's bizarre. Part of it may have something to do, and this is what the Blackberry Raid is named after, with heat exhaustion. So during this time, during these days in early July, it's in the 90s in Virginia, not a comfortable temperature, to be out in your woolen uniform and that kind of thing. And there are blackberries all around along the side of the road that they're marching on. And so the men are stopping constantly to eat blackberries and rest. Sure. And so when they came back, they called it the Blackberry Raid. But a lot of them get heat stroke, and a lot of them die. The medical records, I dug through those, and there are at least several dozen from the column that just died during that period, heat stroke. And this may have affected Getty. But Getty sends the rest of his force under a guy named Robert Foster, who actually becomes a division commander during the Appomattox campaign. Foster gets to that bridge. He gets there at night, and there a fascinating little engagement happens in kind of this horseshoe in the river under the moonlight. But there, Foster only sends in a few companies into attack and leaves most of his men behind. Ends up failing. The whole thing is spooled back to Dix's headquarters, and that's the end of that. So it's not. There's no. And I say in the very introduction, like, this is a story of failure, and they certainly failed to burn that. So those are the 3 operations: the Virginia Central Bridge burning, Crump's Crossroads fight, and then the one at the fight at night at the Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac Bridge over the South Anna.
So I want to show Mike something here. Mike, look at this map and tell me what battle it reminds you of.
Well, here's what's funny. I had written it down, and I was gonna ask Hampton if he's heard of another small engagement fought over a bridge called the Battle of Parsons Mill.
Have you heard of the Battle of Parsons Mill?
I've heard of it, but I can't say.
You might have heard of it on our show on April 1st, 2025.
I missed that episode.
Oh, okay. Well, it was a battle we completely made up. But the interesting thing about
bizarre.
it's
just like this.
It is so bizarre how much the map of the fight at the North Anna, Spears Raid, is almost. I mean, the river, the way the path the river goes is almost the same as we imagined for our fictional battle. The roadways, the fact that they sent a flanking force on a ford. The only difference is ours went around the left, not the right. And it is.
They should have gone right.
They should have gone to the right.
To be honest with you, this is one of the creepiest things I've
It really is.
You showed me this map, and I'm like, all right, so he's using our back. Okay, that's not Parsons Mill.
It's so strange, like how uncanny that is that we, as two idiots just trying to have fun and prank the audience, we came up with. Here, I'll show the camera so people watching at home can see. If you remember the exciting episode about the Battle of Parsons Mill, the only difference is that the flanking force in this one went around the enemy's right. Here they go around the left, and these two crooks, it's hard to point.
The river is the exact same
These
shape.
two crooks in the river are the exact same shape.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah,
I drew it with a marker.
But we put the ford over here, and he forded, and he went around and hit like that. But it's the same thing with the road. Here, is this high ground here? In real life?
No, that's not real high ground there.
Because ours was high ground there. It was like a ridge.
Yeah.
Sorry to go off on the rant there.
Yeah.
It's just bizarre.
What's the name of your episode, The Battle of Parsons Mill?
Yeah, you'll have to go back and watch it.
That's where I've seen it then.
Okay, yeah.
You're flipping through the list of...
Yeah, because it doesn't exist.
Yeah, because I was like, I haven't heard of this, so, I don't know.
It was a great episode, and we just didn't mention it wasn't real until the very end of the hour and 20 minutes, or however long it was.
And we made the casualties ridiculous, and it was but
so this was just it was a prank. So you
for
were
April Fool's Day.
Episode.
So when did the Battle of Parsons Mill happen? In your mind?
1862.
62. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was
part of the
it was the day before the Battle of Wilson's Creek.
That's it, Wilson's Creek.
61.
Okay.
Yeah. It was just it was an accidental little skirmish. I think the Union was moving reinforcements.
But it's the same thing. Everyone talks about the Battle of Wilson's Creek, but no one talks about Parsons Mill. So the parallels to what your book is about, everyone talks about Gettysburg.
Right.
Nobody
talks about these other battles. Yeah.
Yeah. And some of them are made up, and some of them are.
Right. You got to figure out when you read his book which one did he make up and which one isn't.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, you have to be careful about that because, so I on the Appomattox thing that I'm kind of wrapping up, there are some very interesting diary entries by a guy named Jane, and if any listeners know anything about this, I would love to know. There are these very interesting diary entries kind of floating around the internet by this guy named James Allen Davis, who is supposedly a illustrator and correspondent for Harper's Weekly.
Mm-hmm.
And they're very detailed and they look legit, and they have some interesting information about some events that happened at Appomattox. I won't get into all the details, but my conclusion is that my current conclusion is that these things were made up by somebody. They're not real, because I can't find, in using the normal like database searches, newspapers and archive databases or anything, I can't find anything saying that this guy actually existed. And I think they were something that was kind of a creation by a guy who he was maybe a reenactor or something, and this was his character to be this correspondent, and he had created this. But when you find these things on the internet, there's no disclaimer. It looks like, this is from Harper's Weekly, although I've searched Harper's Weekly and it's not in there. So.
That's interesting.
And I mean,
you guys need a big disclaimer.
Well, we did at the end. We said April Fools.
Yeah, but you're so right about that. And one of the reasons I found our episode funny, or the idea of doing Parsons Mill funny, was because of just how much non-sourced or pop history stuff is out there on the internet, and even some books. Like I looked at your book, and it's very well sourced. You list, you have an extensive bibliography, primary sources. And just a lot of people online today are just regurgitating things they saw on a forum or, AI now, right? So AI is just going to look for stuff online.
Yeah.
And it's kind of dangerous in that fact that the further you get away from a primary source, if you don't have those letters, if you don't see that in an archive from this guy, what is it?
That's another great question.
It is a dangerous time when you got AI and pranksters like us. And then also people who, maybe, I don't know, maybe somebody found that, what was the guy's name? James
Allen Davis.
Yeah, maybe they found his diary at some garage sale or something, and the person who put it there. That. Yeah.
If it really exists, I would love to hear that.
Yeah, and maybe, they didn't realize that their uncle who just died and they found it in his attic, who was a reenactor, like he made that. And then they're like, well, I don't understand. I don't like this crap. So they put it away in a garage sale, and then somebody buys it and thinks it's a real Civil War diary and doesn't do the research and just puts it out there.
The hardest part, too, is there's nothing to say that someone in the 1880s didn't write it. Someone that wanted to say, oh, yeah, I was part of this. I did this, or maybe wanted to get put into the newspaper. And even things that are written by people we know, like McLaws, when he was writing about the Battle of Gettysburg, he changed his own thought. He edited that letter, that he sent into the newspaper to change things that said maybe to I was there at this time, et cetera, et cetera. So, and that stuff just gets regurgitated throughout time. So that's always happened, but the internet just opens it up to a whole different world of.
And like the Sullivan-Ballou letter is another one that, was so famous in the Ken Burns, all the wives that were forced to sit there and watch the Ken Burns series when it came out by their Civil War nerd husbands, it all paid off in the end of that first episode with that beautiful letter from Sullivan-Ballou, who historians question whether it was actually him who wrote it, or if it was him, was it embellished a bit as a propaganda piece. So you have to be very careful. Anything a human being's fingerprints are on, you have to be careful. You can't. I mean, I don't know. We're kind of going off the rails here, but as far as the more I've done this show and the more people I've talked to, especially people who've written books about things that I either wasn't very familiar with or most people aren't very familiar with, such as this example here. The more I know, the less I believe anything that I know. You know what I mean? Because everything I knew is kind of has been turned on its head for me, because people have come out. I mean, I remember the first time when we started doing the show again, and we did a myth busting episode with Tim Smith, and I can't remember all the myths that he busted, but the big one that we started with was the battle was fought over shoes. And that one, for me, when I was like, well, Jesus, that got into the Ken Burns documentary. I don't know how many tours I took before we did that episode in my lifetime where the guides said that. And
have they closed that Payless franchise in Gettysburg yet?
It closed in the 1980s, unfortunately. They never recovered from having all the shoes stolen by the Confederates. And that was the big problem for the retreat. The women had such a hard time. The Confederates had such a hard time marching in women's shoes because all the men's shoes were cleared out by Jubal Early's guys.
And that whole thing just comes from part of one thing that Heath said, right? Where he just mentioned
one thing Heath says, and Tim's theory is that's kind of a cover your ass type of thing. It's well, I didn't mean to bring on a general engagement, but we heard there were shoes. and we were poor downtrodden Southerners being picked on by
It's
these
decades after the battle he says that.
Well, no, I think it's in his report because Hill repeats it and Lee puts it in the report as well. So it's months later that I think that he writes the report, if I'm not mistaken. And I think by that point he realized, oh boy, like I started this whole thing. I need to have something to cover my ass.
A good excuse.
Yeah. And so shoes, we needed shoes. You know, what are we going to do without shoes? We were desperate. I don't know. And then of course the Lost Cause people honed in on that and blew it up. And now the Battle of Gettysburg was fought over shoes, and it wasn't. And that's how it works. And so I think they're all great stories, but it's hard for me to, like, you know, people argue over points and stuff like that. And I'm like, why are you arguing when it's very possible that one or both of these people you're citing in this argument lied or stretched the truth or embellished or whatever, you know, or misremembered. Maybe it's not all mean, like lying, but like maybe they just misremembered things. I don't know.
Yeah. And I think that happens especially when people put a lot of weight on things that were written 30, 40 years after the events.
Yeah.
And, you know, I have trouble remembering what I had for breakfast. So how am I going to remember what exactly happened 30 years ago when I'm putting pen to paper?
Yeah.
And so when you write these types of books, so, you know, I've published with university presses, which is great because they have peer review and good editors, and you know, gosh knows I need a really good editor for a lot of my stuff. But you know, they don't do a lot of marketing or whatever. But it's nice, you know, to kind of get that get that focus on that and pay attention to weighing the sources. You know, are you going to believe the diary that was written the day after? Or are you going to read the account that appeared in the National Tribune and everywhere else that everyone knows 40 years later and everyone takes as gospel?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're presented with those interesting things. But I am very skeptical of anything that's written more than a year after the war. Whenever I use them, but I approach them skeptically.
Yeah, I do too. Because the other thing is not only like, how can you remember something that happened 30 years ago, but how can you remember something that happened 30 years ago that happened to you a dozen other times in your service?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, how does Gettysburg not bleed into every other battle that you fought before and after? And maybe it does. Maybe there's something that happens to the mind in a high stress combat situation that enables them to remember certain things. But even if they could, what's their field of vision? That they can't see much. They're not seeing the whole picture. They're just seeing this very small picture right in front of them.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's all, you know, it's that there's so many, it's kind of cliched almost at this point, but when a bunch of people see an traffic accident, they've all got different views. And then there's the whole thing of people who study memory and realize that memory is unbelievably unreliable.
They don't use it in court. You know, like it's not that they don't use it, but they consider eyewitness accounts to be unreliable. And so you take it with a grain of salt. You know, it's not the gospel, especially now in the day and age of video.
And another study I've mentioned is Alan Thompson's In the Shadow of Round Top.
Yeah.
Where like the whole first half of that book is the most meaningful thing I took out of that book is exactly that of how memories change.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm an 8th New Jersey guy.
And he's a lawyer.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm an 8th New Jersey guy, so I know a lot about the regiment. And there's a great newspaper article in the that's probably 1890s or close to 1900 about this veteran living in the town, you know, the old veteran telling his stories to the kids about how the 8th New Jersey fights at the base of Little Round Top. Now, we know that's not where they fought, right? But that's the story he tells. Longstreet's men were on Little Round Top, firing down on us. Now, some might read that and say, well, this guy's senile or he's a liar. But no, that's his memory. His memory is being below Rose Hill and being shot down on by Anderson's Georgians. And to him, he thinks that's Little Round Top because he's heard it told. He's heard the phrase. He's heard people talk about Little Round Top.
Yep.
And he's like, oh yeah, We were below that.
Yeah.
They were shooting down at us.
Right. And they have no, what do you call it? There's no signs back then like we have today where you're on Little Round Top because there's a sign that says
All
it.
right, we're supposed to be in the wheat field. Oh, there's our monument.
Right.
That's where we are.
Right.
Yeah.
And so for him to, right. And so that makes sense to me that he's on, or that he's near a hill in the vicinity of Little Round Top and there's Confederates firing down on him, but it doesn't add up to what we know about everything else. So, but yeah.
And that's not original to him. I mean, it's just memories change. I think the biggest thing I got from Alan's study is the minute something happens, the second you start interacting with other people about it, getting their opinions, talking in camp, your actual brain changes the memory. And I think that's fascinating.
Yeah. And also, if he said, what was the name of that hill? And then somebody else who was misinformed said, I think they call it Little Round Top. Well, now he's misinformed and he takes it, he believes the guy and he goes on spreading that around. Yeah. It's very interesting how all that works. What are you working on now? You working on another book?
So I'm finishing up this book on the Appomattox campaign.
Yes.
And I have a contract with University Press of Kansas. And I work with the last two books, the one we're talking about today and the North Carolina book on great press and does a lot of great military history stuff. And so I am trying to, I'm getting that manuscript together and we'll send it off to them in a few weeks. And then my next possible project, I'm gathering material for a narrative study. No, it's just a book about stuff that happened in Richmond in 1870. So I just thought I'd take a little break from trying to endlessly describe battle scenes and just do something different, something near the kind of the end of Reconstruction in Richmond called the Municipal War, where for a period of several weeks, there were two competing mayors in Richmond. There was a big controversy about who won the election. And then during the hearings on the legal case, the courthouse collapsed and killed a lot of people, and then there are a lot of other aspects to it. So I'm looking into that. But the Appomattox book has been, I've really enjoyed it. It's been very hard to do because there's so much material. I've spent about 5 years on it. There are some great books out there. There hasn't been a comprehensive study of the campaign written in a while. And so I just thought I would give it a shot there. And that's been interesting. A lot of the focus in that is on the federal side, on the decision-making by the high command, the relationships between the Army commanders, which in my talks, I call, mean girls for where we are on that, because there's a lot of acrimony between Meade's staff and Sheridan, and that's been really interesting. But also, it's a comprehensive campaign study that looks at the scouts that were the Jesse scouts or Sheridan scouts, what have you, were involved, looks at the logistical issues. I've uncovered some new things about the participation of the black troops, particularly on the last day of the last battle and the last day, and then other things. So that's been a lot of fun. So I'm wrapping that up and endlessly editing. It's like someone goes into my manuscript and says, inserts a bunch of stupid phrases and typos and things like that. So I'm working on that now.
Yeah, that's got to be the least fun part of the whole thing.
Yeah, I love editing stuff, and I will edit my copy many, 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 many times. So that's fun, but it does get a little frustrating when you think you're pretty happy with a section, and then you put it aside and you come back a month or two later and you think, well, this doesn't look so good.
Yeah.
This is some TLC. So I'm kind of in that stage right now.
Well, good. Maybe you could learn to edit video and you can start editing my shows for me then, if you love editing so much.
Yeah.
Well, Hampton, I appreciate you coming on. I'm glad we finally got to have our talk here. This is pretty cool. And like I said, I started reading the foreword, and I liked it because it was names I didn't know. about, a whole action I wasn't aware of. And so I hope one day I get the time to actually sit and finish all these books that I start for interviews.
It's interesting you should ask that. And I always forget this when I give interviews or talks. I'm pretty much the worst marketer of my books in the world. But
yeah, I'm not that good at it.
So this one we're talking about today, this is coming out in audio in about a month.
Oh, good.
So you can pre-order it now on Audible.
Okay.
And I think it's in its second printing in hardback. I like books in hardback, so hopefully they'll keep that in hardback.
Yeah, I like it.
And then the North Carolina book, Fight for the Old North State, that is also coming out in audio in early October, same day as so both of these will come out in audio. If you're like me, it's hard to read a long book, and if it's on audio, I will definitely get to it. So
yeah.
Hopefully this will get more people listening to that book.
Yeah, good, because I do too.
Hampton, for us Neanderthals that love having a book in our hand, where do you prefer, or where can people buy physical copies of the book?
I always encourage people just to get it straight from the press. And Kansas especially has really good sales. They had one recently where it was 50% off, much cheaper than you could get it anywhere. But these books are sold, anywhere where they sell books.
Like Amazon. Yeah.
Places
and if you happen to be here in Gettysburg and you go into For the Historian, tell them you listen to our show and you heard about the show or heard about the book on Addressing Gettysburg, you'll get a 20% discount there. Could you do me a favor?
Sure.
And hook me up with whoever it would be that I need to be hooked up with to send us books so that we can get authors on the show from Kansas, right?
Sure.
Because we've got a couple of other publishers that we work with in that regard, and I'd like to get some more in there because there's more than one publisher that's putting Civil War books out, and I'd like to get more authors on from other publishers.
I'll send you some contact information.
I love it. Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is all for us today. I hope you enjoyed this. By the way, this is being recorded in August, so if you're listening to this after August of 25, you can get this book on Audible. Otherwise, that's it, Mike. Thank you very much for second fiddling today. Tad, good job in the back there. I've been watching you. Very good job, sir.
Unbelievable.
Thank you back there. And Hampton, thank you very much for coming on. It was great to talk to you.
Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you coming. Thanks for your time.
Yeah.
Talk to you later.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. Talk to you next time. All right. We're done. Thanks,